Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's program. I have my panelists with me, Mr. Aurangzeb Iqbal. Some of our other panelists will be joining us a bit later on. Our today's topic is the apartheid state of Israel. A conclusion has been made by a report which an Amnesty International's report, which has concluded that Israel is an apartheid state. We'd like to put that to yourselves. Those of you viewing this, please place your comments. Do you agree or do you disagree? But before we begin with our program, I would like to show you a small video and then we shall continue with the program's discussion.
Has for the first time accused Israel of committing the crime of apartheid against Palestinians. Amnesty becomes the third major human rights group to decry Israel's apartheid system over the past year, joining Human Rights Watch and the Israeli group B'Tselem. In its report, Amnesty says the roots of the apartheid system date back to Israel's founding in 1948. Amnesty unveiled their findings in occupied East Jerusalem on Tuesday. This is Amnesty's Secretary General, Agnes Callamard.
We are here today to call on the international community to take resolute action against the crime of humanity being perpetrated in order to maintain the system of apartheid.
The Biden administration has joined the Israeli government in rejecting Amnesty's findings. Israel called the report false and biased. The U.S. ambassador to Israel called the report absurd. In a moment, we'll be joined by Paul O'Brien, the executive director of Amnesty International USA. But first, we turn to an excerpt of a new video produced by Amnesty.
Right, so this was the video in question. We will share a few more of the material with you as we proceed with the program. Aurangzeb, Amnesty International's report in which it concludes that Israel is an apartheid state. What do you have to say to that?
This has been an open secret for the last 74 years. Buried by the mainstream Zionist-leaning media and the sheer power of the West, and in particular America. But as we can see now, currently, there's a tectonic changing of plates. And if you look historically, there have been many empires that have come and gone. And at their peak, every empire has felt that it will never end. But when the ending comes, it comes all of a sudden, which we saw in the case of America after 20 years. They couldn't get out of Afghanistan quick enough, or the British Empire when it crumbled in 1947 in India, when they overnight just left and abandoned, and for the bloodshed of millions that occurred. So we can see the changing of the guard, as it were. Every nation or group of nations has a finite time to, it's almost like have the baton in a race. And then the baton is passed to another group, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tests them as he tests all of us. And this is happening in our eyes. And more now, as America and the West are getting a little weaker, the cracks are appearing and the truth is coming out. And one of the greatest things that's happened to make this happen, in fact, is the coming of the smartphone, which is as a result of which we are able to communicate now. And the smartphone has been used very, very effectively by Palestinians. And would you believe it, that 85% of Palestinian contents on social media is actually wiped out. So the only thing we see is 15% of the atrocities that are being committed. And that has moved the world, and the likes of B'Tselem and other Israeli human rights organizations, as well as the biggest human rights organization in the world, Amnesty International, who cannot now any longer turn a blind eye to blatant atrocities, injustices, the ethnic cleansing, the genocide of the Palestinians, and they've had to say enough is enough, and now it's up to the world to see. But it is now Israel is tainted. They cannot get away from the fact that it's an apartheid state, apart from saying it's anti-Semitic. But even then, that has lost its luster, because the more the anti-Semitism charges is thrown about, the weaker it becomes and more ineffective it becomes, as it is now. And it's almost a mockery, because even when the Amnesty International report came in, and we've heard, and what the Israelis had to say was it's anti-Semitic. How on earth is it anti-Semitic? How can you do Palestine has seen a fierce winter, and the Palestinians, the world is talking about housing the homeless as we do in the UK. Here is a pariah state that actually demolishes Palestinian homes, with Palestinians having nowhere to go. And then you had the infamous case of Jacob, who went from Boston in America, went to Palestine, and took over a 3-generational family and moved into their house, making them homeless. And with the Israeli proverb, if I don't steal it, someone else is going to steal it. And the world saw it but did nothing about it. So this is now sticking more and more. Zionism is being, it's a religion of hypocrisy, and it is being shown for its true colors. But as I say, it's all the accolade goes to the long-suffering Palestinians who are changing the narrative through their sheer efforts through the smartphone.
Absolutely. I think we are finding that more and more people are waking up to the reality of Palestine and what has been happening to them. On this note, I welcome our panelist, Sajid, to the program. Hello, Sajid.
Hello there. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Hello, everyone.
Sajid, I've put up a slide on the screen, and this is with the world's eyes wide open. Israel has imposed on Palestine an apartheid reality in a post-apartheid world, and that is the UN Special Rapporteur. What do you say to this? Why isn't this or more of this covered on the national media?
Well, this is what I'm saying. This is the actual. This is the reality of what we're saying here, which is that information like this, you have to go out and search for it. You know, it doesn't come to you. You have to go and get it. And this is the sad state of affairs, that the status quo is not basically what's shown about the Palestinians suffering, and this is the real shame. And it's actually really saddening, because what you see in Ukraine, for example, every single day on our screens is actually happening and has been happening for several decades in Palestine. And the fact remains, of course, is there is a clear difference in terms of, you know, why is there more attention and more focus given to one group of victims, and then over another group of victims, and I think it's down to the actual whoever the opposing side is. So, in this case, of course, it's Israel, and the question the question you have to ask is, what is it about Israel that controls the media and controls even to the point where they control the foreign policy and they can shape the foreign policy of America. So let's not beat it around the bush. Israel is very powerful, and they have one big friend, and that's America. But the key thing here is, of course, is that for some weird reason, even though there are people in Israel, you know, asking for a two-state solution. There is this Israelis. There are even Jews that are protesting on the streets of Israel and asking for a two-state solution, for peace to happen. But even just by their own people asking for it, it doesn't. It falls on deaf ears, and this is why then you have to ask the question: what does it take to actually resolve this problem? Because clearly, information is not getting to the mainstream media. So, what does it take to actually sort this problem out?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the big question, isn't it? I mean, you would think, going by the international law, going by the past precedents set, it would it wouldn't be difficult to see who is in the wrong. And I mean, and this isn't even about being right and wrong. This is kind of about being evil and what has been done to the Palestinians. That is
Yeah, I
just
mean, yes,
pure
exactly.
evil.
I mean, the other tragedy, of course, is it's a well-known fact, a documented fact that Gaza or Palestine is actually the largest open prison, isn't
In
it?
the world, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, now we have this slide. Which 21 African countries meet in Dakar to denounce Israel's apartheid crimes against Palestinians. So thankfully, something is happening.
Yeah, but
The countries are waking up.
but the thing is, but you have to put yourself in the shoes of the Israelis. They will say, "So what?" They will say, "Okay, great, thank you for that, but
Yes.
what are you?"
Until and unless meaningful action
Yeah,
is
I
taken.
mean, at least we are seeing here that there is some change happening at public level. Other countries waking up, this
They
taking a
are,
stand on this. So
Zambai,
although,
they
and I
are
think
countries.
you beautifully meant,
Oh,
but I think as you that Israel has very powerful friends, as in a friend, as in the USA, standing behind it. But that is bound to change at some point. I mean, there is some big shifts taking place. There are new alignments taking place, and surely more of this going out, and even the Western public, more and more people within the USA are recognizing that what has been happening to the Palestinians is just wrong. I mean, it's
yes.
criminal.
But
What do you say to that, or
that's right. Even if, for example, you just pretended for 1 second that the West, the public in the West did not know about this, everybody in the Muslim world knows about it, and that in itself is a tragedy. And the question is, there is plenty of Muslims around the world that have protested against all sorts of in throughout the years. And actually what's happened is that nothing's been done about it. And again, it comes back to the point, we go over this topic again and again, which is who are in control, who is the government around in the Middle East, basically, and what are their motives? Are they pro Israel? Are they pro Palestine? What exactly are they doing, and what are they doing to keep the peace? And that's why it's such a shame. And I think that and it's really, really refreshing to hear that the American people actually start to question, where is my tax money going?
yeah,
My tax
Well,
money
absolutely.
potentially is now going to the sorry.
sorry.
Aurangzeb,
Yeah.
would you like to come in, please?
Yes, I think the one of the biggest changes that's happening is that the younger generation, they are no longer relying on mainstream media, but they're getting their news through social media platforms, of which there are many instances, and of this kind of information is coming through, and you find that even in the Jews in America are turning away from, on the one hand, how can they side with Black Lives Matter and demonstrate against brutality against George Floyd, and on the other hand, applaud same kind of tactics and worse happening to the Palestinians. So there's a massive shift going on in America. But, Brother Sajid, I would differ from you, because I remember I subscribe to the Times Now newspaper and also to the Haaretz newspaper, digital online version. And at times I find that whenever there was a stabbing in Jerusalem a couple of days ago. A Palestinian stabbed 4 Jews to death, and he was shot. And that news was in the Times newspaper, and each and every comment was anti-Palestinian. And the Jews were out in force in that narrative, in the comments. But I didn't see a single Muslim writing in. Why can't we subscribe to these, pay a bit of subscription, and on the day of Qiyamah, we can say, hey Allah, I did my little bit. And Alhamdulillah, I wrote to the Times and I said, why is it that Palestinians get killed on a daily basis and you never cover the story? But here you covering this in a big way. Why? And all the comments are anti-Palestinian. And I said, how many ethnic minorities actually post comments on these? And the 1 or 2 that do, they are more racist than the whites. So in the past, they've always ignored me. And yesterday, they did reply to me and said, and in fact, this morning, they said, thank you for your email. We are going to pass this over to our editorial team, etc. So I said, thank you very much for responding to me. But can you please tell me why I continue to be banned? And then I got and Haaretz newspaper have lifted my ban. I don't know whether it was a mistake or whatever. So I'm commenting on that again. But at least I'm doing my bit. Can you imagine even if 100 Muslims out of 2-3 million in this UK actually subscribed to the Times newspaper and wrote a comment? How many are they going to ban? But you see, even when I used to comment, I used to have no support. And therefore, it's a free for all. So I think as it's in Surah Ra'd, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says he will not change the condition of a people until they change what is in themselves. So rather than us blaming other people, we're going to say, what am I doing? What are we doing? And if we can't, living in this country with all the facilities that we have, if we can't even, we don't even have to lift a pen, we can't even go on whatever platform and write a comment, then that's a sad state of affairs. What are we helping? I mean, the Jews, I mean, one of the ways that the Jews act is all the media platforms, their guidelines are identical. If enough people complain about you, whether you're in the right or the wrong, they have to remove you. And the Jews, the Zionists, are very, very clever. So if they find that somebody's stating a lot of facts and everything else, they'll just en masse write to whichever organization and get you banned. But if there's hundreds of us, how many are they going to ban? And also the newspapers, they will think we're going to lose subscription fees. These guys are, and at least the Jews, the good thing, one thing that's in their favor is they don't mind spending money in terms of being involved in the media. And that's our fault. If we still haven't learned after being here 50, 60 years that we have to be involved in some way in the media, then it's our fault.
Absolutely. I think you've hit upon some really some facts that kind of do show that where our weaknesses lie. We are not the most active of people, and I have seen that you have been very active. I mean, on the occasions that where you have pointed things out. And I think, when you say that if more and more of us did come on board, I wouldn't put it past these guys to bloody block all of us. I mean, look what they are doing to Russia, and that whole hypocrisy is kind of there for all to see. The
point I'm making, Zamurad, is look. Ultimately, our judge is Allah. Yeah. What we've got to do is go on a night and say, you know what, I did something. Can we honestly say, hand on our heart, I did something for the Palestinians. I did something for the Kashmiris. I did something for the Uyghurs or the Rohingyas. Did I try to make any difference? And if we can, that's fine. If not, then we need to do something. That's all I'm saying. The rest we leave to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm not saying we need to, more and more of us need to become active. We need to get the message out there. Without a doubt, I was just saying
And
in passing that, yeah, I would have put it past them just blocking us altogether.
what we tend to do is make rhetorical speeches. We're very good at that, off-the-cuff speeches. But where it really matters is when you can enter into a discourse and win the argument, or at least get your point of view across. And that does not mean to say that you come across insulting to the other side, because then you've lost, but to make factual points.
I'm going to, yeah. Sorry, I'm going to come back to you, or I'm going to come to Sajid. Sajid, if you can see on the screen, this is the Amnesty director, and he was discussing. This was at Women's National Demographic Club. He made these comments regarding Israel's treatment of the Palestinians being an apartheid, and immediately after that, there's been a witch hunt against this guy. I mean, you know, how much more powerful do you need to be? We have seen in Britain alone, there have been clips, recorded clips, covered on television, where the Israelis, I think from within the embassy, they're telling the Labour Party that if anyone dares to speak up or kind of put the facts to the public, we will bring them down. And I think they managed to do that to Jeremy Corbyn, did they not? So what would you say to that, Sajid?
Yeah, I think going back to Zebai's point, he's right in saying that there is a gradual shift in the perception of Israel and their treatment of the Palestinians. So for years, I mean, polls have showed that, I think that recently, that Democrats, they always sympathize with the Israelis at twice the rate of support for the Palestinians. But since the Israeli assault on Gaza, especially the one in 2014, a backing for Jewish states has fallen, and support is now about evenly divided, which is interestingly, it's come leaps and bounds really from what it was. And the change is actually accentuated amongst younger Americans, with adults under 35 far less well disposed towards Israel than older generations. So we are seeing a shift in, as Zebai rightly said, that it's the younger generation that actually are thinking about what's going on, and obviously using their own intellect and their own opinions, so being opinionated about what's going on. And that's the key thing here. And separate surveys, kind of like, for example, in 2020, found that the half of Democrats want Washington to shift policy towards more support for the Palestinians. It's really, I mean, these are the kind of facts that are on the ground, and potentially changing the way that people in America.
just on that note, I would like to share with yourselves a short clip, if I can bring it up, that is. And okay, let me see. This is, and I think this kind of touches upon the very point that you have just made. Let me just share this with yourselves first.
Amnesty International, the world's largest human rights organization, has...
That's not the one. We need to find this second one. If you just bear with us. And this is right.
Dear Israel, by classifying you as an apartheid state,
we are not being anti-Semitic.
We are simply exposing the crime
that you commit daily against humanity.
It's depriving Palestinians of clean water,
education, or even jobs.
Whether it's forcing Palestinians to demolish their homes,
to make way for settlers that are colonizing Palestinian lands.
Whether it's systematically expelling Palestinians or driving them out of their homes.
For over 73 years.
Whether it's setting laws different to the first-class Israelis and the second-class citizen.
The Palestinians.
Discrimination.
Deprivation.
oppression,
Occupation.
And injustice.
This is what the occupying power needs to be
Condemned and sanctioned for.
Because apartheid needs to be demolished.
The narrative must change. Because Zionism is racism.
And racism approved by a terrorist state
is apartheid.
Sajid, coming back to yourself, having
Yeah.
seen that, please,
Yeah.
what do you have to say? What would
Exactly.
you say to that?
It's just, I think, just reinforced my point that, you know, if you looked at most of the faces in that video, they were probably under the age of 30. So it is the fact that I think more and more, of course, people are becoming and starting to realize what is actually going on, and even support for the Israeli government, alhamdulillah, policies is even falling within the US Jewish community, which is, I think, what you touched upon earlier on, Sam.
Yeah,
With the poll last year, that was it, I think 2020, finding that 25% of American Jews agreed that Israel is an apartheid state. So I think this is really interesting, and I think that more and more people making more and more noises, and especially on the political level, will hopefully bring about some kind of change. The weird thing, I just don't, what is Beggar's belief is the fact that the Jews, of course, suffered tremendously at the hands of Adolf Hitler, and this is why it's Beggar's belief, because, and then you have now what you see, of course, is persecution being carried out by the Jewish people towards the Palestinians. And
Absolutely.
if anybody knew about persecution, it was the Jews. You
Yeah.
know, so you
And
would
I think,
expect them to
yeah,
have more empathy and more understanding of the
absolutely.
situation.
Absolutely. I mean, to be honest, you know, the decent people, I mean, even within Israel and around the world, Jewish people, they are waking up to that, and they are making those points. And there is a slide that I would like to share with you guys later on. And they should do. Now, coming to the slide we have now on our screen, Israel must give Ukrainian refugees 48 hours to appeal deportation, the court rules. Aurangzeb, if you can please come in on this. I mean, these are people who have known about being expelled, not only in the Second World War, but throughout history. And there are Ukrainians who have come in and who they've deemed that these are not Jewish, so they have to be deported immediately. So the court is saying, no, well, give them 48 hours.
There's one word.
Mhm.
There's one word answer to all this, which is paranoia. The Zionists are absolutely, utterly paranoid that the demographics will change and they will lose their status. Why else are they doing what they are to the Palestinians? Why do they still go around the world to promote what they call Aliyah, resettlement of Jews in Israel? Because they know time is against them, the demographics will change. In Israel proper, 20% are Arabs, and their numbers are increasing. And the Jews, the numbers are decreasing. And the Orthodox Jews, they're neither use nor ornament, because they have nothing to do with the country as such. They do not work. They are leeches. They rely on the government for everything from housing to benefits to free medical and all that. The model that's there is unsustainable. And for how long will America keep funding this? And Biden is on record.
In all fairness, sorry, I'm just kind of interrupting you there. I just wanted to make this point. I mean, there is an Orthodox group within Israel who is actually opposed to joining the army, and doing what they are doing to the Palestinians, and you know, they are, some of them are having to actually escape Israel's regime, the apartheid regime. Please, if you could just touch upon that as well.
It's not a glossy picture when you scratch beneath the surface. But one thing is, they are absolutely paranoid, which is why they've enacted a law saying this is a Jewish state. But thing is, what they don't have is the numbers. I mean, we can say Pakistan is an Islamic state because by the sheer number of Muslims. I mean, Pakistan could have 2, 3, 4, 5 million Jews or Christians or Hindus come in. It wouldn't make any difference. But the Jews, the number is so low that another million Palestinians or Arabs would completely change the demographics. And this is why they cannot afford, they can occupy them, but not give them the vote, because they know that it will no longer remain a Jewish state. They will not be able to enact racist laws, which they are at the moment.
I mean, simply, I think hopefully at some point the realization will come that this cannot go on forever. Luckily, what we are seeing, there is a power shift from this kind of unipolar world. We're going into this multi-polar world where we have Russia, China, the US, and there are other powers rising as well. And this is actually giving a headache to Israel, where they were able to control the narrative, complete narrative of the suffering of the Palestinians. So I think, thankfully, we are finding that more and much more of that. I think a balance at some point we are hoping will be achieved, and we do hope that particularly the Muslim world will come together, and as the West has come together for Ukraine, shouldn't the Muslim world learn from that and manage some sort of boycotts against Israel and so forth? But in fact, we are seeing that more of those countries are beginning to recognize Israel. So here we have an example, and you'd think that this was kind of just regarding Ukraine, but I think the Palestinians have just seen the double standards, and they've taken this measure. Pro-Palestinian activists renamed the street outside the Israeli embassy in London to Apartheid Avenue. What do you guys think of
that? How do you shame the shameless?
Absolutely. And I think just on that point, on that very point, I'm sharing on our screen a picture of this young 15-year-old Palestinian boy. And this is one of our sisters, Astri Wadia, who requested us to bring this to your attention. And what has been done to this little boy, and he has been fined up to $5,000 US, has been imprisoned for 9 months. Come on, world, wake up!
Can I say something here? We live in the West, where if a young person doesn't get enough likes on Facebook, they need a mental health check, and we are so concerned for their mental well-being. And the same world pays no heed to the suffering of children such as this in Palestine. And this is nothing new. Thousands are arrested, sexually assaulted, physically assaulted, incarcerated. Can you imagine their mental well-being?
It's unbelievable. I mean, we see Ukraine, it's been 30 days, just over 30 days. Yeah. And we are seeing stories of those Ukrainian kids who have had to flee war, coming into schools, and, preparations being made to make them feel welcomed, which is a good thing. And then there's Palestinians, 73 years this has been happening. I mean, this child, this isn't something that's happened years ago. This just happened now. It's still happening in Israel. What do you say to that?
Palestine must get back-to-back coverage for 1 week, as Ukraine has done. Apartheid would be dismantled within a week. That's the sad.
I think you're right. I think you're pretty. I think you're spot on. Absolutely. I do agree with you. I mean, this is just kind of going over this. We have been seeing this for years, but when you go over it again, it does boil your blood. And this brings me to this next photo that we're sharing on the screen. Call Zionists what they are: Nazi criminals. Isn't that what Putin just said about Ukraine? That we have going in to denazify Ukraine, and they have felt disgusted that Putin used such words. But doesn't this apply to Israel? Guys, what do you think?
I'll let
I think I touched upon this earlier on in terms of obviously the psychological impact of the history of the Jews basically and what they've actually gone through throughout history. For them to actually know out of everybody know best what it's like to be persecuted, which of course begs the question: what is going on and why it's being allowed to carry on? Because surely they know very well what it's like to be at the hands of criminals and basically also leaders of the like such as Adolf Hitler, and I think that I think it does come down to the fact that there is I mean, contrary to what was being just said now, there won't be any coverage for a whole week basically like Ukraine. That's not going to happen, and therefore what we've got to do, I think, is be much smarter and look at, for example, I think we missed a trick when it came to, for example, the BLM movement that was basically broadcasters day and night throughout for weeks. I think what should have happened, basically, there should have been a concerted effort to actually just take on board not just Black Lives Matter, but all lives matter, and actually then shoehorn the issue that we're seeing in the Middle East into that particular problem, and somehow use all of these kind of campaigns that are going on around the world and basically piggyback onto those campaigns. And I think that's the way to go. I think otherwise, to get
in fairness, Sajid, I think with Black Lives Matter, and I think whenever someone came out to say all lives matter, I mean, personally, I felt that they were just using this to kind of get the attention away. And in reality, the African people have suffered tremendously over many hundreds of years. So I was actually quite happy, and I was supportive that Black Lives Matter should remain Black Lives Matter, to hit home the message that they are still being oppressed in the West. You've seen it at the Poland border. We are seeing in the US.
Yeah,
a black person gets pulled over, and they're fearful of their life. I mean, it's shocking.
Yeah, but the Black Lives Matter, of course, was focused mainly with what happened with George, and it happened potentially in what happened in America. And now what I'm saying, of course, is to actually work smarter and potentially how we can use media and use what's current and what's modern, basically, and use campaigns of the time to actually somehow work with that. I think, for example, there was a peace envoy that was basically kind of instructed to go and sort out the Middle East, and by the name of Tony Blair, if you remember. What did he actually do as the chief negotiator to sort out the Middle Eastern process? And
probably
10 millions and 10 million pounds were actually just spent just for nothing.
Well, he's probably advised the Palestinians to go jump in the sea and die to just end up resolve the issue for them.
That, obviously,
knowing him,
following the end of his premiership, obviously he moved there. He was given a home, 12 members of his staff, and a fleet of armored cars. Living in Jerusalem, he had access to private jets and expenses. Brimming with confidence. He ignored limitations.
And he's not a war criminal, but Putin is. It's amazing.
So you don't, exactly. What you don't do is this is what I'm saying is who's making these decisions, because you're sending people like that who actually have been kind of instrumental in the crisis that we're seeing in Iraq, for example. The same person basically is being sent to the Middle East to actually to broker a deal to bring about peace. Yeah. I mean, it's just shocking. You can't make this stuff up, really, can you?
I mean, I'm going to come to Aurangzeb, and I in one of our previous programs, Aurangzeb highlighted the Abraham Accord, and this, I believe, deserves a program on its own. I would like him to just touch upon that, and also I would like both of you to touch upon the Muslim world, in particular the Middle East, kind of almost normalizing relations with Israel. Israel, Aurangzeb, what would you say to that, please?
Look, sadly, most of the Muslim leaders are beholden to particularly America and the West, and they will do as they are told. So if they are told to make peace with Israel for a few dollars more, they will make peace. Not a single condition was imposed by any of these, and that was as a result of arm twisting by Trump. And I think the step that Imran Khan has taken is a fantastic one, providing enough of the Muslim leaders can begin to realize that they do not have to be muppets, that collectively there is enough power to stand up to a bully. You know, there's a joke, isn't there, told amongst our families that the mice were sick of the cat, so they all had a meeting and they said, how do we become aware of when the cat's coming to us, and said, oh, he has a bell round its tie a bell round its neck. They said, yes, fine, that's a brilliant idea. And in the morning said, well, who's going to go and do it? And nobody would. So individually, that's the problem. But collectively, you know, alhamdulillah, there's a huge power. Look at the oil wealth that is within the Muslim countries, the sheer numbers that are in Muslim countries. They're all consumers. So the West cannot act in isolation until and unless we allow them to act in isolation. But I hope that realization dawns on the Muslims with the shifting of this balance of power from America towards China. I see the United Nations Chinese member has also spoken up for the Palestinians and said these illegal, unlawful settlements must stop. Ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians must stop. So that's something.
And so has Putin. Vladimir Putin has done the same.
Absolutely,
and in very strong words. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, but I think devil's advocate here a little bit, if I may.
Yeah, please.
Because the interesting thing is, again, the same thing that Imran Khan is doing is actually what's being done by the Middle Eastern bunch of puppets. Now, if you think about it, Imran Khan, obviously, he's a great leader, one of its kind. However, it's interesting that Imran Khan is selectively not mentioning anything about the Uyghur Muslims. Now, this is what I'm saying. The question is it when it's basically right for Imran Khan, he will do what's right for his country potentially, and is the same thing being done basically by the Middle Eastern? Because of course they don't want to upset the apple cart, they don't want to change the status quo. Therefore, they're looking at obviously changes being made nationally, for example, and thinking actually internationally, why do I want to actually affect this? It's going to affect me back at home. And I'd rather basically not do that, not get involved. So I'm just seeing potentially, I'm not saying that there's hypocrisy here. What I'm saying that potentially it's a matter of convenience, I think. And
I mean, if I may come in on that subject, where Imran Khan has made, he has talked about Palestine, Kashmir, and where he has missed about you, and he has been asked on record that why doesn't he raise this issue? And he hasn't kind of shied away from answering, and he's pretty much said that, look, with the Chinese, the relationship we have, we don't need to create those sound bites on media. We can actually pick up the phone, we can actually sit down with them, and we do in private raise our concerns, and we do put our questions to them. So thankfully, one thing I give him credit that he hasn't denied. He hasn't kind of run away from it. And he said that because of our special relationship, we do put it to them. But we recognize as well that in the most difficult time in Pakistan's history, when every secret agency in the world had come onto our western and eastern borders to break Pakistan with their armies and attacking us through these mercenaries, China was the only country to stand with Pakistan, and this is where Imran Khan has said that do not think that we don't. We do.
But that argument, I've heard that argument time and time again. But the problem is it's like, for example, somebody basically basically giving you a loan when you're rock bottom. That's effectively what's happened with Pakistan. But if it happened with you, for example, it doesn't mean that same person can go around and do whatever he wants with your potential fellow Muslims and your neighbors potentially. That's the key question here.
Can I come in here? If you look at the Western media, they would have you believe that what's happening to Uyghurs is worse than what's happening to Palestinians, and that is not the case. The Uyghurs is something very recent, and the Palestinians is an ongoing ethnic cleansing and loss of their land for 70 odd years. So the two are completely, in some ways, different. But the Western media will always promote the hatred towards its perceived enemies, such as Russia and China, and then do nothing about what's happening to the Palestinians. And why is it taken 5 years for America to recognize genocide against the Rohingyas? And insofar as Putin is concerned, within 1 week, they pumped £150 million to start war crimes against Putin. You see,
Sajid, I think Aurangzeb has pretty much articulated Imran's. He's probably watched that interview better than in more detail than myself, and I think this was the point where Imran said that, look, the oldest disputes that are standing, can we actually get to them, and then we can come to this as well. And this is where I think Aurangzeb has beautifulally kind of explained that.
I'm just trying to be fair.
I mean, for us, it's very painful. I think just for all of us, it's very painful seeing what is happening in China. And I am on record stating this, that if China doesn't rectify this, then their fate will be the same of that of the Soviet Union. I mean, the same Soviet Union which tried to oppress the Muslims within its boundaries, and even the Christians. Look at the result. You cannot, you cannot suppress nature, and the same would happen to China. But and in no way, and I'm really afraid to even kind of comment in this way. Whereas the Uyghur Muslim issue, China sees it as a strategic action that is taking, not in hatred of the Muslims, because we can see China's relationship with the rest of the Muslim world is different. And into this, what I would put, and it does in no way does it justify what is happening, is that the Uyghur Muslims were being targeted just as Ukraine was targeted by the West to use them as proxies against China. And what China's gone, and they've taken a really heavy hand against the Uyghur Muslims. But at the end of the day, they can try all they like. The Russians tried against the Chechens, and they couldn't. The Mongols tried against the Muslims. They will never succeed. And I think the quicker they rectify that, the quicker China can take its place on the throne of being the superpower of the world.
I don't understand, obviously, from their perspective, the amount of obviously benefit that Pakistan. So it's a joint effort, of course, joint benefit venture between China and Pakistan in terms of what they're doing, in terms of the CPAC and everything else like that. However, why is it that China are basically behaving in such manners? What do they stand to gain? And I'd just like to basically remind everybody, I think if you recall, I think there was something like 22 countries in, I think there's 22, I think EU, I think there was America and a few others that basically written to the United Nations, actually there's just, and asking for some action to be taken against China because of what's been happening and how because of their treatment with the Uyghur Muslims. And then, of course, on the interesting response was not the United Nations response, but the response of another counter letter being written to the United Nations by Muslim countries, actually saying there's nothing actually wrong, which is quite interesting here. And the question that begs is it to do with are these things bigger potential games? There's plots being basically forward. What is actually going on that we are not privy to? Because surely the man on the street knows what's going on and what's happening in China is wrong. And of course, no one is saying, of course, that the Chinese The problem there, of course, is
here, if we observe this, Sajid, and the way I kind of try to view this, that on one hand we have the West, which publicly in the newspapers day and night vilifies the Muslims, a West which has been actively involved in destabilizing the Muslim world, destroying numerous countries, oppression of the Palestinians happening with its full support. And how Israel is able to act with impunity. And I think, this is where we try to view, and similarly what Putin did in Chechnya and what's happened in China, putting those two in perspective. For us as Muslims, we still want the bigger evil to be tackled, and that is the one which is hell-bent on showing the Muslims as being, or the Muslim religion in itself, and the Muslims themselves being a problem in the world. That's, I think, looking at it in that perspective is where to get our priorities right as to what things are happening and the scale at which they are happening.
I understand. I totally understand what you're saying, Zambai, but all I'm saying is that I'm just basically effectively just speaking for that Uyghur Muslim that,
it's a good question.
Basically has no voice effectively in China.
You are absolutely right to raise this, because it is something that we should acknowledge, and it is happening as well. And we are hoping that once, as Russia made peace with the Chechens, China would realize the same. But I personally, as I have seen, because I followed that part of the world and the politics in there very closely, that this was the plan to open the Eastern Front for China. And as well as the Western Front that they've got in the South China Sea, and they've gone in to do what they did. And this brings us to a point of what's happened in Ukraine, for example, in Mariupol, where the Russians gave them the opportunity to lay down arms, and the Ukrainians refused to do that because the very same Ukrainians, or when this was happening, that they went into Chechnya, the Chechens were told to do the same. And when they did, there were mines placed and they were bombed, they were killed. So the Ukrainians were aware of this, and is the reason why they decided, no, we're not going to put down arms, we're going to fight. And it's kind of, the justice, it does kind of, the equilibrium eventually is achieved. And you are absolutely right to kind of raise this. Aurangzeb, would you like to add something to Sajid's point?
Is that I completely sympathize with our brothers and sisters, our Uyghur brothers and sisters. But what I say is that I don't deny that there's been oppression. I don't deny there have been horrible atrocities committed against them. But we have to temper all that, knowing that all this news is coming from Western channels, and to what extent is it amplified? Insofar as the plight of the Palestinians or the Kashmiris and Rohingyas, it's without a doubt, and it's on a massive scale. I mean, Kashmir, even the official figures say some 70,000 Kashmiris have been killed by Indian forces. Those are official figures. And 10,000 women being raped. One village 26 years ago, the men were asked to leave the village, and the girls from the age of 8 and women up to 80 were all gang raped, and not a single Indian soldier has been charged, and they're having to live with that. So those kind of atrocities the West will not even talk about. But insofar as the China is concerned, yes. But so I've no doubt the atrocities have happened, but I do believe they are nowhere on the scale of what's happened to the Kashmiris, to the Palestinians, and continuing, and to the Rohingya.
And also, Aurangzeb, let's not forget the Indian Muslims within India, the fate that is awaiting them on daily basis. I mean, this seems to be getting worse for them. and we can kind of almost expect a Rohingya-like atrocities within India happening with the Muslims.
Well, we've seen Yogi and Modi will do anything to win an election. If it means they've got to kill a few million Muslims or hundreds of thousands of Muslims, they don't care. They're just they're just power hungry, and that's so they're really. And I think Modi realizes he's got a formula: whip up anti-Muslim sentiment and win an election. Where in fact, that kind of thing is done here in the UK as well. When the elections come, then it's all about closing the borders, being hard on immigration, and the ugly head of racism rises at the time of the elections.
So coming back to Palestine, one of the developments that I see that potentially this could become fruitful is the Syrian situation, Syria kind of stabilizing, and for them to have met with the Saudis, and Syria being extremely important in this, Syria, Jordan, and Egypt. Of Jordan, I don't have too much hope as yet, but I think Syria and Egypt, possibly, with them being stabilized, becoming stronger, and Pakistan has kind of made more effort to work with them. Could this be the way to force Israel? Because you can't imagine that they would actually stop oppressing the Palestinians without force.
I honestly think.
Sajid? Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Sajid, would you come on to that, please?
Yeah, sure.
And then we'll come to
I think with somebody like Imran Khan, I think it's possible that he can actually gather all of the neighboring countries and potentially work with the Israelis to actually sit down and just somehow broker a kind of a peace deal in which basically the both countries and both can actually live side by side without having to whip up basically a kind of a terror campaign that seems to basically have its own cycle, and it happens every so often. And in that process, of course, thousands of people die, buildings are basically blown to bits, children obviously, and not just that, but also the psychological effect of all of these youngsters that basically have to see this and go through it. Of course, these things, when you go through life as a youngster and you see what you see, it sticks with you. You can't erase that from your memory. And as a result of it, so I think we've just got to, and I think with Imran Khan's leadership, I think at the moment he is a godsend, and I think someone like him with his charisma can probably pull it off. And
he may, and Sajid, he may not even survive the next 2 days. There's
but the interesting thing is that's what people were saying as soon as he got into power. That's what everybody was saying. But he's still around, so that's lucky. But I think when his time is up, obviously his time's up, and that's the same for everybody. However, he's got to try his best basically, and I think he is doing his best. And he's quite bold actually by saying to America, no more drones, for example, no more aircraft. Sorry, not allowed. Boom, full stop. And I think that requires some bravery, I think, on the part of...
Keeping in mind our time limitation, I'm going to give the final word to Aurangzeb. Aurangzeb, what would you say to this new dynamic, possibly Syria, Egypt? It's a sleeping giant, isn't it, Egypt? And I think with Russia having such a strong relationship with Syria, a better relationship with Pakistan, what do you feel that this could be?
The greatest fear for Israel is its own demographics. I think this explains why the Israelis have dual nationalities. They will, at the drop of a hat, will leave en masse when things are hotting up against Israel as an apartheid state. And I think it's only a matter of time there'll be clamour around the world. There cannot be a two-state solution. In fact, somebody suggested a two-state solution where the settlements, that Israeli illegal settlements, they call themselves Palestinians. So those settlers will never ever want to be in Palestine. So they will go back to Israel and leaving a state on its own. This is the new thinking now. for it to be a two-state solution. But I really can't see it, because even as a one-state solution, as soon as the enough pressure from the world and America relents, or the American Jews force Israel to abandon apartheid, then it's democracy, and that's the end of Israel as we know it.
Well, thank you very much. I think it's been a very fruitful discussion today. I thank you thank you again, Aurangzeb, Sajid, for taking time out from your busy schedules to join us on a very important subject. And thank you for your contributions. Until next time, thank you very much.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.